Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Olga Chernyak. I'm also in a beautiful Melbourne, Australia at this point. Would like to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and the sovereignty was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I am myself from Ukraine. I was born in the town of Kryvyi Rih. It is a large mining town in the central east of Ukraine. Moved to Kiev for my studies. Kiev is the capital of Ukraine on some point, and was I would say wanted enough to participate in a program between Department of Education of Ukraine and the same Department of Education, but in China. Went to China, studied in China for 3 years, learned Chinese through my first year, and then entered Chinese University in Shanghai to study there for 2 additional years. Worked a lot with community. I became a founder and an admin of the group Ukrainians in Nanjing. So that was the first time I was for a year in China. We did a lot of events. We did a lot of job postings. We did a lot of advertisement with expats and migrants overall in the city. While I was in Shanghai, we were working a lot on maintaining the same group, but at the same time, we were doing a lot of Ukrainian cultural events with embassy representatives present, especially on the important dates like Day of the Flag of Ukraine, Day of Independence. I think it was really important at this point because that was 1 or 2 years, if I remember correctly, after the Maidan revolution. And I feel like all Ukrainians gathered there and wanted to show the support for Ukraine further, even if you are overseas. After that, I went to Germany, where I finished my master's degrees in economic behavior and governance. Met my partner there on some point, and that's how I ended up in Australia. But at the same time, while I was in Germany, I lived for half a year in Poland on exchange program. Didn't necessarily work, but volunteered for organizations and presented at the festivals like Ukraine in the Center of Lublin, where I was talking about Ukrainian relationship with European Union, Ukrainian relationship with Poland in terms of social, cultural, historical, economical, and Ukraine's journey to EU, which stages it take, where Ukraine is now, and how our countries could benefit each other more, and how we can live better together, and what Ukraine can bring to EU on Ukraine's behalf. After meeting my partner in Germany, he also was there doing his master thesis. We met in a German class. He was Australian, and that's how I ended up in Australia in the first place. Australian journey was a bit more complicated, I would say, due to Australian very different and complex immigration system and permits to work and who is allowed and who is not. And after very long visa processing times, I was finally allowed to work in Australia, I think around 3-ish years ago. And I started working in migrant and refugee space. I did a lot of policy work, evaluation work. I did a lot of data analytics work, supported various organizations and various projects that were funded by Department of Home Affairs, Department of, at this point, DESI, now Department of Education, Workplace Relationships, and Department of Employment and Workplace Relationship, and Department of Education. Worked with Office for Women, worked with AEC on some point, even Australian Electoral Commission. Well, our organization was sponsored, funded by AEC to work with them. We work with engagement with culturally and linguistically diverse people. We work with delivering the settlement programs and helping refugees through our advocacy and our overall overarching policy work. I could also talk about what I'm doing here a bit more in depth. I am on board of organization Forcibly Displaced People Network. This organization dedicates its all time and its all efforts towards helping LGBTIQ forcibly displaced people. Why we use the term forcibly displaced is just not everybody who is seeking asylum comes all over the planet. Not all of them come on refugees visas. People with different migration streams might have not just one reason for leaving their country. And these people require specific and very different support than other types of refugees and other types of migrants. It is a very important concept of intersectionality and how we can help that and how we can prevent incidents from happening, because a lot of people who are LGBTIQ live in some of their countries, maybe not on humanitarian visas, but they would rather prefer not to be settled within their communities and not to be connected even with the communities from their countries in the place of settlement. And that's what settlement organizations need to understand. And that's need to be embedded throughout the whole network of settlement and all practices that Home Affairs does and that migrant and refugee organizations do here. Sadly, it's still not a common practice. It would be a best practice to do that, but it's not as common as it is yet now. So we're contributing a lot of our time volunteering for this, and we have several employees who do this amazing work, and hopefully one day things will be better for the refugees in Australia. Secondly, I also do a lot of work with Welcome in Australia. We have a lot of portfolios. We have cities, universities, clubs, and workplaces. I think primal part of all of this work is to make the society, to improve social cohesion in the society. We work both with receiving communities and with migrant communities to make Australia, local areas, sports clubs, all the university here more of a welcoming place. Do a lot of evaluation work. I am the one who is evaluating the local councils and their practices and policies. I'm also the one who is evaluating sports clubs and universities, etc., etc. We're also working on a lot of housing projects. As we all know, Australia is in a housing crisis at this moment. So we are trying to find solutions on how to tackle this with the resources that we were given. And at the same time, try to find something creative and something new that was not thought yet before. Besides that, I also work with a lot of, as I said, culturally and linguistically diverse communities. I worked with emergency response in Victoria through one of the organizations that I was involved at the time. It is really important for governmental officials, for public sector and public service to understand who lives in their areas and what necessary instruments and tools they need to have on deck. So, for example, when there was flooding in Greater Shepparton area and Echuca area of Echuca City in Victoria, they needed to have intelligence on the language and English language proficiency of communities that live there to distribute the messages, emergency messages, where people need to go, what people need to do, and who will be harder to reach overall. So that would be right away almost intelligence that we can provide on in a matter of few hours or even faster, depending on the number of areas. I do a lot of work of this sort especially with Victoria, because Victoria is one of the most multicultural states. I would say probably Victoria is the most multicultural state in the whole Australia. And we also do it with other states and territories overall. We work with, we are starting now the new initiative, Welcoming Workplaces, where we would be working with local businesses in Australia to have more inclusive practices of hiring, more inclusive practices of HR, and any single little department that exists within the business. Make sure that people from diverse backgrounds feel welcome, making sure that there are policies and procedures in place to address discrimination, that they're being followed through, that people are not afraid to access those, and there are fair working rights and best practice in the workplaces are being maintained. It is obviously voluntarily, same with the councils, same with sports. We cannot force any local council or sports club to go through our process, but we most likely welcome to, and we support them through their journeys. We create networks of them where they can share their best practices, where if one of them have the greatest initiative possible, we make sure that others hear about this too, and they can also implement this in the future. Everything else, sorry, I hope you're gonna cut this out. With Forcibly Displaced People Network, we also run conferences where we invite speakers, LGBTIQ speakers and researchers from all over the world. At this point in the conference last year, we had people from USA, we had people from USA, we had people from New Zealand, we had people from Thailand, we had people from Asia, from China. Overall, all over the place, we had two beautiful women who came from Ukraine, who are leaders in the LGBTIQ space, who are working with transporting, particularly, I would say, transgender people from the occupied regions by Russia, because Russia had, at some point, a hit list of activists in the areas that would need to be, I would assume, eliminated at that point. And these two beautiful women were doing this job on how to transport these people to a safer parts of Ukraine, and if they would be willing to, then outside of Ukraine, of course. Both of them are still, well, those two women are still in Ukraine, and they're continuing this work on a daily basis. They're working with refugees, they're working with LGBTIQ refugees, and it's just good to see the amazing work being done. It's good to see that people step up when there are no systems in place to help people of LGBTIQ, who identify as LGBTIQ on any of the letters in this matter. It's good to see that people are stepping up and people are doing amazing and important work. And on our behalf, we are doing this in Australia. We are now currently working with community sponsorship of LGBTIQ refugees from overseas. We already settled, I believe, we started working on this maybe 4 months ago, not more than half a year, and we have already successfully settled 4 refugees in Tasmania. It's been an amazing journey, and I think one of the most rewarding part of the works that we are doing and what I'm doing through all of the organizations that I'm involved with is that you can directly see people's lives being changed for the better, and you're here to support them. And obviously I will do, and as everybody with organizations that I work with, we do our best, and we of course all work overtime. We all dedicate our lives to this. It can be very disheartening to hear the stories. It can be very hard to understand what is happening overall. But it's very rewarding to see the real life change that you can impact and you can influence.
Let's now go into some questions about your life and your journey and everything that kind of brought you to this point. I know that coming into a new country and learning to assimilate the culture, the different ways of being, what was the most interesting thing that you found was different when you came to Australia?
I think well, might be a controversial opinion here. What Australians like to talk about themselves is that they're very laid back. And when I arrived here, I realized that this is the furthest from the truth. Every single country I've been to, people were way laid back than Australia was. And I would say that was something that's routed me in an interesting way. I would say I did not expect it to be this way. That was the difference. That's, I think, the cultural one. I was probably not lucky enough, but when I came to Australia, I settled in Canberra for 3 years, and Canberra is overall quite a welcoming place and quite a multicultural place itself. So I did not have a lot of experiences that, for example, some migrants and refugees had in other parts or other states of Australia, I would say. I was pretty lucky.
You were lucky then. So, in your work with data analysis and visualization,
Yep.
how do you ensure that diversity and inclusivity are considered and represented in your findings?
Every time I do a research or any data analysis for our work, we always use, I try to use all the possible lenses and intersections, depending, of course. Depending, I mean, it's not because we don't want to do them, it's because the data does not allow us to do that. Like, for example, with census data sets, there are privacy limitations. So if you would look at a lot of intersections, you need to drill down more and more, which means you come to really tiny amount of people. Like, for example, if we use very local suburb area, right, and we need to consider gender lens, we need to consider religion, we need to consider whether somebody has a disability or any health condition, whether person has caretaking duties or not, because this impacts greatly on their ability to attend focus groups or attend anything. And sometimes it will be this one or two women who will just go into that category, but census will not tell us this. And it's rightfully so that census will not tell us that there is this number, because they don't want people to be identified, and people can be identified through that. So I think it obviously depends on the number of people there. But every time I do my research, I always take into consideration every possible lens that I can think of, and I constantly improve myself on different intersections, and I'm trying to make sure that our research and our data is representative of the community.
So, you've been involved in advocating for policy solutions that enhance people's lives. Can you share an instance where you focused on policies that specifically address the needs of diverse or underrepresented communities?
Well, recently, Department of Home Affairs was calling for all of the feedback to review their multicultural framework. So I hope we did something there. I would say policy solutions. It's still like the report is not out. It will be probably out in half a year or so. So I am looking forward to see what will be happening in this regards. Otherwise, with policy, maybe not statewide policy, but in terms of policies of local governmental areas in Australia, when we do accreditation, welcoming cities, when I evaluate their policies and when I evaluate their strategies, plans, guidelines, whatever they have, we always, of course, advise them where there needs to be an improvement. We write them a report where it states what is missing, how is it missing, and how they can improve it, whether we can help them with this or whether they can do it by themselves. It's their choice. But that's how we advocate on the policy improvement.
So, what are some of the challenges that you face in interpreting data from diverse populations? And how do you address these challenges to provide accurate and inclusive analysis?
Well, it depends on the data sources, right? If we would be talking about census or if we would be talking about community organizations that collect data themselves. I think in terms of community organizations, there are quite a few challenges because they're usually not, I mean, they are funded, but their funding is so limited that they cannot afford any proper data collection processes or tools or anything of that sort. Their database is an Excel spreadsheet, which is usually, and I'm not attacking any of them here, but which is usually non-standardized and poorly made in the first place. And I think the challenge is that the lack of funding, in particular, of protection of databases. When we work with community organizations culturally and linguistically diverse, people from cold backgrounds, people from refugee backgrounds, people who are refugee LGBTIQ, especially, just this Excel spreadsheet, is in the wrong hands, that can identify these people, that can tell people where they live, that can tell people where they are located, can be a dangerous tool. So we need to make sure that none of this is getting out in any way, that the websites are protected, that everything is protected. And usually people who work with these organizations are advocates, they're very passionate. They're not number one cybersecurity person in the country. They will not necessarily be dedicating their time to help to do this. Of course, there are some webinars, but webinar is a webinar. It's not going to make you a cybersecurity expert. So I think that's one of the That's one of my concerns, particularly in terms of refugees.
How do you believe data analysis can influence policy making, especially in creating more inclusive and equitable policies?
It might be my data brain speaking. Like, I do not necessarily believe in policy without data. I do not believe the policy that is like data. I also mean here evidence-based. There should be proper evidence-based. There should be proper intersection analysis. Because if there isn't, then how do we know the policy even addresses the issues that exist? How do we know it's getting to the target audience that it's needed to be the target audience? We see it in quite a lot of places, for example, with welcoming cities, with local governments. Few of them, sometimes when you start initial conversation, they don't even know who live in their local area. They have no idea that this is like that 30% of people were born overseas, right? 20% of them are of Chinese heritage and speak these languages, and 50% of them don't speak English. And when you design and when they design their community forums and everything, they do not translate it to Mandarin. They do not translate it to anything. So how do they even know that they serve the community they're supposed to serve if they don't do that?
That's actually quite a huge limitation. So, what analytical tools have you found most effective for analyzing data related to social policies? And how do these tools help in advocating for change?
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm self-taught, because I did use some analytical tools back in the days. I used R in my studies, but now it's basically just me, census data sets, the Home Affairs data sets, a lot of others like NSWARE from previous DESI, all the online tools that can give me the information. And then I use Microsoft Excel, I use Python to analyze what I need and to get the results that can influence the policy or inform the policy in the first place.
Yeah, there's nothing much you can do without the information, without the data and accurate data. So you implemented your skills across various sectors. Can you discuss how the approach to data analysis and policy evaluation differs across these sectors, particularly concerning diversity?
I think community organizations and non-for-profits are now also moving towards data space. I'm not saying they're striding away from what they used to do, but back in the days, I mean, like a few years ago when I started working here, I remember when I was trying to make more data-informed approach, it wasn't like disregarded. It was regarded that it wouldn't be necessary in the first place. A lot of leaders were relying on anecdotal evidence, anecdotal stories. And of course, I'm not saying that storytelling doesn't have a power. And storytelling has amazing power, and it can persuade one important person to make a right decision. But storytelling always policies need to be backed up by data. And that's how you would know that you are actually doing what needs to be done. That's how you can identify the problem and identify the gap. And there are proven methods of doing this. And as of now, in the last 3 years of working here, I see more and more organizations that want to work with data analytics, that want to know what is happening in the areas, that want to know who needs to be helped and where is the gap. So I'm actually quite happy to see this change. Not change, I think, I wouldn't call it a change, I would say it's an expansion.
So how do you measure and evaluate the impact of the policies you advocate for, especially in terms of their effectiveness in improving the quality of lives of diverse groups?
Well, in our case, evaluation, so like departments contract us, they don't contract us for evaluation, right? This sort of policies, but they have this, I think now I'm involved in the project which is called Road to Belonging. So it's a lot of settlement organizations, and we are developing the monitoring and evaluation framework for migrants and refugees who settle in Australia, and we are working on it at the moment. I think we have monthly meetings or something. We are working on, I would say, educational outcomes. We look at whether more people from migrant and refugee background are accessing higher education, vocational training, anything of that sort. We look at, obviously, income. We look at income, especially in terms of gender differences, because we all know gender gap is here and it didn't really go anywhere. It's just not as prominent as in a lot of other countries. And we look at that. We look at health outcomes. I think health outcomes are the ones that bother me a little bit more than others, because what we know is that migrants and refugees that come to Australia in the first years of their life have better health than overall Australian population. But after 10 years of settlement, their health outcomes are actually deteriorate rapidly. And I think one of the major indicators would be that we would like to close that gap, whether identify why they're deteriorating. Is it because they're unfamiliar with the system, which is true, because I came here, I wasn't familiar that I need to book GP to go to see some other doctor, right? And just overall, that glad that there is Medicare, but Medicare doesn't cover all of the expenses. And a lot of people just do not want to do that. A lot of hospitals, I think I was involved in evaluating Queensland hospitals, South Brisbane hospitals, 5 of them, and their policies and practices against one of the frameworks. Framework was developed on cultural competencies by Migrant and Refugee Health Partnership, and whether their policies and procedures. Mostly, we are worried about procedures, or whether they know what is happening, basically, whether they use nurses as translators, which shouldn't be done unless they're a certified translator. There were a lot of incidents of mistranslation. There were some horrific incidents that happened. Whether staff in the hospitals know how to call the translators, how to understand which language the person is speaking, whom to call, whether it's a woman from a certain background, maybe don't ask for male translator, right? If it's a tiny community, for example, there are a lot of tiny communities, and if we encounter domestic and family violence situation, which nurses and doctors are on the front lines of that too, you should call a translator that is not from the same state, that is not from the same community. It should be someone, like if we're in Queensland, ask the translator from Tasmania. So we make sure that the local community of this of people who speak this particular language would not know that is happening, because otherwise, most likely they would if the interpreter is from the same place.
Yeah.
So we're trying to identify why health outcomes are deteriorating. Of course, there's not some gaps people already know why it is, because healthcare is expensive, because new system, translators, issues with translators, or just hospitals not knowing how to access this. But if in a matter of decade or something we can see the gap finally closing, that will be good. We have trainings for that, we have the competencies for that. There are standards that hospitals, like for example these South Brisbane hospitals, they went through the evaluation with me, and we wrote them a beautiful report, and they want to continue doing that and continue improving.
So finally, what advice would you give aspiring professionals who wish to enter the field of data analysis and policy evaluation with a focus on promoting diversity and inclusivity?
I think in my case, it's just I was very self-motivated. I just started developing my own skills. And I think I didn't back down, maybe because I'm a bit stubborn on some point, and I just kept talking about this in the meetings, that we need to be doing this and we need to be going through that from all perspective, from all of the intersections. At the same time, listen to people from the community, listen to people from small communities, understand where they are. Do not expect a single mother of 5 children from migrant background to come to you and tell you her problems. Like, you need to be there at the time where it's available for her, and that's how you can make it better.
Well, thank you so much for coming online and sharing your wisdom with us today. You certainly chose a very challenging but important profession. And I think the lens that you view the world is because of your background, and you see the importance of having to do this work. It's just amazing, the layers and layers that impact marginalized communities or minorities if this information is not available and at hand. And I really like the fact that you have this focus on the healthcare issues, privacy issues. These are small communities that can be impacted if their information goes out. So thank you again for your work. It was an absolute pleasure interviewing you today.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you to everybody who has tuned in today. The Diversity Connector is bringing you professionals, experts in the DEI space, coming and sharing stories and ideas from all perspectives. Tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. But in the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And bye for now. Thanks again, Olga.
Thank you.
That's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open, and definitely stay connected.